Congrats on reaching the final module of this course. As we've seen in previous modules, we are not failed Asians or second best Westerners. Rather, we are unconditionally loved family members and valued citizens in God's kingdom. Through Jesus, we are redeemed and received healing from our brokenness and sin. But it absolutely does not end there. We are now in a more healthy position to serve and bless others. In this module, we will explore what it means to embrace the in-between, being healed in Christ, and not just in a spiritual sense, but in an embodied sense too, where our ethnicities are not irrelevant to our faith, but can be used for God's glory. If we fail to understand this, then we risk going back to our former way of life. Yes, we receive Jesus' healing, but we will keep it to ourselves. God has made us Asians between cultures to uniquely, 1, join him in the ministry of reconciliation, 2, go to the margins, and 3, speak up and contribute to global Christianity. Let's talk about embracing the in-between. Some people like to describe themselves as bicultural, right, and seek to get the best of both worlds. Now, whilst this is true, I think it can be a bit too simplistic, trying to only see the positives. Expressing in this way is buying into the I can't say anything bad because I might get kicked out mentality. If we are not real about our brokenness, then we can't receive healing. Although we are all at one stage or another trying to integrate into the Asian and or the Caucasian communities, I hope you see that there is a bit of futility there. Ultimately, these pressures will always be at work, leaving you in between. Complete belonging is only for those who deny and suppress their other identity as much as possible while elevating one to achieve acceptance. Staying in the in-between tension is an uncomfortable place. None of us like being in the middle of something, an argument, a messenger, or being in transit while traveling, or being in between jobs. Adolescence when you're neither a child nor an adult. It's often a stressful place, being neither here nor there. And that's why we try to get out. Scholars call this marginalization. Asians between cultures can be doubly marginalized, both from our Asian communities and our Caucasian communities. I acknowledge that we've talked a lot about the negatives of Asians between cultures so far. Today, we'll look at the positive opportunities. Many of us have made great inroads. Some of you might have a great community where you are a leader and have some influence. Maybe you've integrated into your host country very well, whether it be Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the States, for example, and have established a home and sphere for yourself and your family. Now, scholars call this privilege. Many Asians between cultures have a great level of privilege depending on our wealth, our class, and ability to integrate. Some Asians between cultures whose parents are skilled migrants or can speak English well may experience more privilege than those who came through war or have had little education and have found it difficult to integrate into society. So while we may experience marginalization, we may simultaneously experience privilege. As an Asian between cultures person, I experience simultaneous privilege and marginalization. Another word for in-between or marginal that Sang-Hyung Lee uses is the term liminal. Its marginality as the result of marginalization is the powerless and demoralizing space into which Asian Americans are pushed into. I shall use anthropologist Victor Turner's term liminality to refer to the positive creative nature of the in-betweenness in marginality. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the ways we can use this in-between liminal status as a creative and positive opportunity, something that is quite unique to us as Asians between cultures. The first creative purpose we have is reconciliation. 2 Corinthians 5:18 says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here." All this is from God who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation, that God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. Ephesians 2:14 says, "For he is our peace. In his flesh he has made both groups into one and has broken down the dividing wall, that is, the hostility between us." Now, for some of us, the next step on our healing journey is to seek reconciliation, since we have received reconciliation with God, with our family, our church leaders. We may have been distant before, but now we've owned our contribution, and out of the Spirit's overflow, we can treat people graciously as they may not deserve, out of sacrifice. For the cultures I used to look down on, I started to see the beauty and wisdom of their ways that was always there. Their collective and familial nature, the deep respect they have for elders and those in authority, their care for the whole being. And for the cultures I used to elevate, I started to see the cracks, the competitiveness and chaos of individualism, the disregard and public humiliation of leaders. I'm not sure what it is for you. I used to mainly read Caucasian authors, hear their sermons and teaching. Now I try and incorporate people who are not Caucasian. Now that I've started this journey of healing, instead of avoiding those who hurt me and stay in my place of refuge, Jesus empowers me to reach out. We can start seeing cultures not in terms of superiority or inferiority, but critically in its inherent beauty and worth while being corrupt and fallen. They are all redeemable because of Jesus. Only people healed by Jesus can go back to the places that gave them wounds and to love. Back to Asia, back to Hong Kong, Malaysia, China, to Korea. Back to the majority Caucasian place of study or work. Back to our families, back to our ethnic churches. And for me, healing of my wounds enabled me to start genuinely loving and caring for the mainland Chinese population in my local area without prejudice or stereotypes. And it's opened my eyes to see the vast people coming here, lost sheep who need Christ. Instead of my family and community's historical enemies, to not just serve them, but to love them. Now, on the other hand, we can also discern more clearly whether to stay in situations of be more pressure we receive. Some of us may have had very intense be more pressures, and we need to go away from toxic situations. Others might choose to stay, knowing we don't need others to give us validation, protection, or acceptance, confidently asserting our needs without fear. We can gently rebuke and restore those who've sinned against us with genuine desire for their restoration and not vengeance. We can assert healthy boundaries and gently confront unhealthy, pressuring dynamics in our families and societies. We can stand up for others who are being pressured with these be more messages as well, many of which can be really harmful and hurtful. We may need to direct people to professional help so that they can work through all the wounds and brokenness. The second purpose we ought to consider is going to the margins as marginal. Luke 4:18-19 says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Jesus says this. He was a marginal person. He was driven out of Nazareth, his own hometown. He was Galilean, a Jew in the margins of the empire. He did not seek acceptance and belonging with the Romans or the Jewish leaders, those in the dominant and majority groups with power. His mission was to come in between man and God, and at his death, abandoned by both friends, humanity, and the Father. Jesus has a special focus on the margins. And in this Luke passage, he looks out for the fringes of society, the prisoners, the blind, the oppressed. In the Beatitudes, Jesus blesses those who are poor in spirit. He is a marginal figure who is also for marginal people. Being more like him and following in his example leads us to consider going to do likewise in the margins. And this will include people outside our immediate family and community, because we are no longer consumed into the be more mentality. For many of us who have privilege, we can use our privilege, our worldly success, money and influence, use these inroads that we've built into either community, use what God has given us, not for ourselves, but to serve the poor and the outcast. Now, those who are marginalized can include other Asians between cultures, as we are doubly marginalized from both Asian and Western communities. But then there are those that are actually triple, quadruply marginalized based on their gender, class, and the disabled. And as we who have been marginalized increase our empathy, and as people who know the pain of being on the fringe and rejected, we can connect with their struggle. We won't minimize their pain and struggle. We can empathize and stand with others like this, not in a top-down way, but side by side as those who've experienced it themselves. David Gibbons says this, "Greater connection with our communities, though, comes through our pain, not our successes. Our shame, marginalization, and invisibility, that is the connection." Now, there's also the Anglo Community, as they've come to terms with the changing global order. In the big cities, they have started to feel on the fringe, a feeling that is new and unfamiliar. They feel like they're losing the culture war as it becomes less and less Western and less conservative. Now, as we've talked about for ourselves, when people feel marginalized, they feel broken. Things that are good, like safety, security, start to become demands. Out of fear and protection, they start to use sinful means to gain their desires at the expense of people whom they perceive are in the way. Refugees, new migrants, Muslims, Africans, Indigenous peoples, and also poor people, LGBT, babies or children. So as we do this, we can be reminded that when Jesus stood up for those in the margins, the religious leaders would grumble and hate him more. The third creative purpose we have is to raise our voices. Philip Jenkins says, soon the phrase a white Christian may sound like a curious oxymoron, as mildly surprising as a Swedish Buddhist. Such people can exist, but a slight eccentricity is implied. Also, he says, in 1900, 83% of the world's Christians lived in Europe and North America. In 2050, 72% of Christians will live in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Now, all too often, statements about what modern Christians accept or what Catholics today believe refer only to what that ever-shrinking remnant of Western Christians and Catholics believe. Also, Parag Khanna says Asia also has most of the world's 20 most populous countries, including China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Japan, the Philippines, and Vietnam. Asia is home to some of the wealthiest countries in the world on a per capita basis, such as Qatar and Singapore. Of the estimated 30 trillion in middle-class consumption growth estimated between 2010 and 2030, only 1 trillion is expected to come from today's Western economies. Most of the rest will come from Asia. So in an increasingly post-Christian West, the message of the gospel is becoming more foreign and unappealing than ever before. Christians now get the minority experience. We often face stereotypes as the naive Ned Flanders or angry bigot. There is awkwardness or hostility as we are misrepresented in the media. People do not give us space to share God's story. And at the same time, Asia is on the rise economically and spiritually. Now, the Western world increasingly wants to understand and get in on this phenomenon, whether it be for financial reasons or spiritual reasons. They are increasingly looking to us, bicultural people, to help. And now that the tables are turned and that Asians and Asians between cultures seem to be on the rise, we need to avoid using our new status to simply repeat what was done to us by applying be more messages to people who are now in the minority. Now, I've heard some people say that bicultural Christians are well suited for cross-cultural leadership given our daily lives are an exercise in cross-cultural living. Maybe you're called on by Western communities to help understand Chinese migrants or clients. Maybe you're called on by family to help them as they live in a society where they are unfamiliar with the culture and language. But I hope you've seen through this course that we can take that brokenness, our wounds and baggage into these spaces. And if we do that, we won't be effective bridges. We are at risk of subconsciously elevating some and looking down on others. We may listen to some voices and want them to contribute, but not others. We are tempted to be more at one place, usually our place of work or church, and by denying and suppressing our ethnicity. As Asians in between cultures, now is our chance to speak, to raise our voices, to bless and serve others. We can rejoice in this newfound prominence because we were not visible before, whether it was Channel 7 in Australia or TVB growing up. The English-speaking Asian was on the outside. We can rejoice because we were misrepresented. We were one-dimensional sidekicks, kung fu masters, nerds, or token Asians. We can rejoice because we are being heard and stories about our families and our communities in all their multi-dimensional, non-stereotyped ways are being told. For so long, we have heard other people's voices and other people's cultures. People like Billy Graham, Tim Keller, Paul Tripp. Some of them have become our heroes, our role models in the faith. But they're not culturally neutral, right? You may not realize it, but they speak out of their own ethnic context too. But we resonate with them and they have blessed us. So we should feel confident that our ethnically particular voices can also bless and resonate with others too. The next global Christian voices could be Asian, it could be you, but not just in the Christian world, but in the secular world, or the sporting world, the entertainment world, the culinary world. How will you speak in the places where God has placed you as his redeemed bicultural ambassador? We don't just want to regurgitate what people from other cultures have said. Let's not use our voices to blindly elevate Western culture and use our voices to blindly put down Asian culture. We need to rediscover our unique perspective as Asians between cultures. And in this way, we reflect another facet of God's goodness and glory to a world that is ready to hear it and that needs it. There's more at stake here, not just for our local communities. The future of global Christianity is at stake. We have a foot in both the West, where Christianity is declining, and the East, where Christianity is rising. We can help Western Christians to see that it's not that bad being a minority. We don't have to be afraid. Those marginalized can see this as an opportunity to be creative, to be liminal, and as a result, when Christianity is on the downside of power, it can actually have the most impact. Let's use our bicultural heritage to bridge the divide between East and West and to unify believers in the global church and to lift others up in our communities and play a key role in the next phase of world Christianity. Yes, in the Christian and missionary world, but also in all the spheres of life God has given us to speak into. But we can only do that if we have a redeemed sense of who we are. Not as generic Christians, not as deficient Asians or honorary Caucasians, not elevating one culture over another, not fearful but free in liminal space to use as God directs us. How could God use you in this new world order? Use the questions in your workbook to ensure what you've learned has implications for you personally as well as those you serve.